in the mountains of East Asia, behind one of the most secretive borders on Earth, a small, isolated country built one of the most feared weapons in human history. Not through wealth, not through powerful allies, but through decades of fear, strategy, and relentless determination. Today, North Korea stands as one of the world's nuclear powers. But this story did not begin with missiles or atomic tests. It began with war, and a nation that believed it could never again afford to be weak. To understand why North Korea pursued nuclear weapons, we have to return to the early Cold War and the scars left by the Korean War. From 1950 to 1953, the Korean Peninsula became one of the most brutal battlefields of the 20th century. Cities were flattened, millions died, and when the fighting stopped, the war never truly ended. There was no peace treaty, only a fragile armistice and a heavily militarized border dividing North and South Korea. For the leadership in Pyongyang, the lesson of that war was simple and terrifying. Survival depended on power. North Korea's founding leader, Kim Il-sung, believed that his country would always face threats from larger powers, especially the United States, which maintained troops and nuclear weapons in South Korea during the Cold War. In this environment of permanent tension, the idea of nuclear weapons began to take root. By the late 1950s, North Korea had already started laying the foundations of a nuclear program. With assistance from the Soviet Union, the country began building a nuclear research complex at Yongbyon, north of Pyongyang. Soviet engineers helped construct laboratories and research facilities, and North Korean scientists were sent abroad for nuclear training. In 1965, a Soviet-supplied research reactor at Yongbyon became operational. At first, the program was officially civilian, focused on energy and research. But in Pyongyang, the strategic thinking was already shifting. Kim Il-sung quietly asked both the Soviet Union and China for assistance in developing nuclear weapons. Both refused. Even among communist allies, nuclear weapons were too dangerous to share. But refusal did not end North Korea's ambition. It simply forced the country to learn how to do it alone. Throughout the 1970s, North Korean scientists began building their own nuclear infrastructure, mining uranium, refining fuel, and constructing reactors that could produce plutonium, the core ingredient for atomic bombs. At Yongbyon, new facilities emerged: fuel fabrication plants, reprocessing laboratories, and experimental reactors. Slowly, quietly, a nuclear capability was being assembled piece by piece. For years, much of the world paid little attention. North Korea was poor, isolated, and economically struggling. Few believed it could actually build a nuclear weapon. But by the 1980s, the signs were becoming harder to ignore. North Korea completed a larger reactor capable of producing weapons-grade plutonium. And in 1985, Pyongyang signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, agreeing at least on paper not to develop nuclear weapons. Yet, suspicion remained. International inspectors began questioning North Korea's nuclear activities, and tensions escalated through the early 1990s. In 1993, North Korea announced it would withdraw from the treaty, triggering the first major nuclear crisis on the Korean peninsula. For a moment, war seemed possible, but diplomacy intervened. In 1994, the United States and North Korea reached an agreement known as the Agreed Framework. Under the deal, North Korea would freeze its plutonium program in exchange for economic aid and energy assistance. For several years, the program slowed, but the deeper mistrust never disappeared. Both sides suspected the other of cheating. By the early 2000s, the agreement collapsed. North Korea restarted its nuclear facilities. In 2003, it formally withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty altogether. From that moment on, the path became clear. North Korea would build the bomb. Diplomatic negotiations continued, the so-called six-party talks involving the United States, China, Russia, Japan, and both Koreas. But progress was fragile. Then, in October 2006, the world finally heard the proof. Deep beneath a mountain in northern Korea, a nuclear device exploded. North Korea had conducted its first nuclear test. The blast was relatively small, but symbolically, it changed everything. North Korea had crossed the nuclear threshold. Since then, the country has continued to test more powerful weapons, 6 nuclear tests in total, with the largest in 2017 believed to be a thermonuclear device. Alongside these weapons, North Korea has developed long-range ballistic missiles capable of reaching far beyond the Korean peninsula. Today, analysts estimate the country may possess dozens of nuclear warheads, with the potential to produce many more. To outside observers, the question often seems obvious. Why would such a small and economically fragile country pursue nuclear weapons at such enormous cost? But from Pyongyang's perspective, the logic is brutally simple. Nuclear weapons are not just tools of war. They are tools of survival. North Korea watched what happened to governments that lacked nuclear deterrence. Countries like Iraq and Libya, where regimes collapsed after foreign intervention. For North Korean leaders, the lesson was clear. Without nuclear weapons, they believed their state could be vulnerable. With them, they become nearly impossible to attack. In this way, the bomb became more than a military project. It became the centerpiece of North Korea's national strategy. A shield, a bargaining chip, and a symbol of defiance against the global order. But there is a deeper historical irony in this story. North Korea began its nuclear journey as a weak nation recovering from war. Today, despite sanctions and isolation, its nuclear arsenal forces the world's most powerful countries to treat it as a strategic player. A country of 25 million people, capable of influencing global security. It is one of the most dramatic examples in modern history of how technology can transform power. And yet, the story remains unfinished, because nuclear weapons bring both security and permanent tension. The Korean War never officially ended. The peninsula remains divided, and every missile test reminds the world that the shadow of that conflict still hangs over Northeast Asia. North Korea's nuclear program is not just about science or weapons. It is about history, fear, power, and a small state's determination to survive in a world dominated by giants. Because, in the logic of Pyongyang, one belief has guided every decision for more than half a century. In a dangerous world, the ultimate guarantee of survival is the power to destroy.